everyone. All right, so today we are continuing with Plato, and we're going to look at a different dialogue, the Republic, and specifically Book 7 of the Republic. Now, in our reading of the Euthyphro, we went over the dialogue structure and sort of how to read the dialogues a little bit. The Republic is a dialogue that takes as its main subject the question of justice or politics, more generally. The question that the Republic wants to answer is, what is the best society? How should we structure society in a way that will create the greatest amount of justice and harmony? Now, a lot happens in the Republic. I don't want to go over the entirety of Plato's idea, but in general, Plato believes in a sort of complexly structured society that is broken into three tiers, a tripartite structure of society. The three tiers are a class of workers, people who will, work in the mills, work, as tailors, as farmers, as blacksmiths, whatever jobs you have. The second tier is sometimes called the class of auxiliaries, and these are the warrior class, the soldier class. This is the army. And then at the top, we have a class of people that Plato calls the guardians. And the guardians will be the rulers of society. And these guardians should be philosophers. Right? This is the idea of the philosopher king, which you'll hear about. People will talk about Plato's philosopher king. Right? The philosopher king refers to this group of guardians who are warrior philosophers who will rule society. Plato's ideal society is not a democracy then, right? We saw Socrates' skepticism about democracy in the Euthyphro, right? How can we trust the laws, the city, to the majority, to the many, those who don't know the truth, don't know the truth about reality, right? In order to have a well-structured society, a good set of laws, in order to have just laws, we need to have people, the people who are making those laws, be educated, to know reality, to know what is true, and make laws based on what is true. And so the people who are best suited to making laws are those who are most familiar with the truth, with reality, and those people are philosophers. So philosophers should be in charge of a city, of a state. Now, Book 7 is about education. It is about what education is, why education is so important in society, and what education consists of, what kind of education is needed if we're going to produce philosophers who are capable of making good laws for a city. But let me say a little bit more about the structure of society in Plato's Republic, because the Republic is many things, but it is, in addition to being a treatise on politics, on a well-ordered society, also itself a kind of description of reality, of what is. And it gives an example of how to act, how to structure a society based on reality, right? So the Republic works through a series of analogies. And in Book 7, we get many analogies. We get the most famous Platonic analogy, which is the allegory of the cave, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But I want to highlight the analogical nature of the Republic. And to mention before we get into Book 7, one of the larger analogies that's happening, that this tripartite structure of society with workers, auxiliaries, and guardians, workers, warriors, and rulers, that is itself derived from and grounded in an analogous tripartite structure, which belongs to every individual. We want to structure society to be analogous to the structure of an individual. That is one of the main thoughts of the Republic. We still do this, right? We think of the body politic. The body politic, we imagine, is a kind of metaphor for politics based on the individual body. You want the state to function as a unified individual. And if you want that to happen, you need to know how the individual functions, how the individual is structured, how the well-ruled and wise individual operates. So this tripartite structure of society is based on a tripartite structure of the individual. For Plato, every individual has 3 levels of being also. There is the bodily being, the purely physical being of an individual, which is all of the sort of physical behaviors of an individual, right? To eat, to sleep, to right, any kind of bodily function is the bottom rung, the bottom tier in the structure of being an individual. Every individual has a body. That body functions independently. Now, body then is analogous to the workers, right? The working class in Plato's Republic. That part of society which really makes things able to function. Right? Nothing can even get off the ground without a body. Nothing can even get off the ground without a working class. They make the whole thing go. They are not, however, for Plato, the executive part of the individual. They are the sort of corporeal manifestation of the true essence of the individual. So the individual has a body, and the physical functions of the body make up the lowest part of an individual's being. There is then second part to being an individual, which is our what Plato calls our spiritual part, which we could also understand as our emotional part. And so these are the experiences of the individual, which are more than merely physical, more than pleasure and pain, physical sensations, but are desire, right? Love, fear, hatred, uh, envy, any emotion that you can name, but also virtues like courage, like right, moderation, generosity, uh, these sorts of character traits, which are not a question of merely having a body, but are what you feel. Right? Now, these are not purely physical, right? Emotions are about our relations to uh, the world. They're relational. They aren't concrete objects. They aren't physical things the way bodies are. Now, today, maybe we'd say they are indicated by chemical flows in our brains, that they do have a concrete physical manifestation. Fine. But the experience of being in love, the experience of being furious, right, is very different than the experience of being in pain or the experience of being nauseous, something that is merely physical. They're relational, they're contextual, they're about, they are not just bodily, but they are also partly intellectual. They can be controlled by your brain, right? Your body is less able to be controlled by your brain than your emotions. Right? You can prevent yourself from becoming angry. You can't prevent yourself from becoming hungry. So this tripartite structure is hierarchical. Meaning that we move from the part of an individual or a society that is least powerful to that part which is most powerful. So in the individual, we move from the body to emotion to the third part of an individual being, which is the mind, or the rational part, that part which is able to use logos, right, which is able to speak the truth, know the truth, have discourse about the truth. And this is the highest part of an individual. It is the part that is most free and most autonomous, meaning self-ruled. The body is ruled by, to a large extent, the logic of the body, right? I need to eat, I need to sleep. The body dictates all that, and I have to work within the confines of the body. My emotions are slightly less free, or less free than my rational mind, right? We call the emotions the passions. It's a little archaic. We used to. And a passion is something that is passive, right? Something that happens to you, in which you are passive, right? I'm overcome with fear. I'm overcome with anger. I fall in love. Right? It's something that happens to me. I am subjected to my own emotions. So the emotions are like something bodily in that we don't have perfect control over them. They're passions. We are relatively passive when it comes to our emotions. Our thought, however, in our minds, we are much more free. Free to think for ourselves, free to think on our own terms, free to contemplate whatever it is we wish to contemplate, free to reflect on ourselves, the world, in whatever way we want, right? In our minds, we have a freedom that can never be taken from us. And this is right, the idea that you can imprison my body, but you can never tell me what to think. Right? You can never break my spirit. You can never change my mind. No one has the power to make me think something. People can manipulate my emotions. People can lock my body up or torture me, but no one has the ability to change the way I think. Only I have the freedom to decide what I think about, what I judge to be true or not. And so this is the highest freedom. It is the freedom of the mind that makes the mind the highest part of this tripartite structure, the highest term in the hierarchy of an individual. But in addition to the freedom, for Plato, the other reason that the mind is the highest part of an individual is because the mind is also capable of having power over both the emotions and the body. The mind is able to control the body. It can't make hunger go away, but it can. It has the power to suppress hunger, right? To give us the power to work through hunger or thirst, to stay up late even after we're sleepy. So the mind has control over the body to some extent, more control than the body has over the mind, right? Because at the end of the day, the mind can decide to end the life of the body, right? Through suicide, through self-sacrifice, through war, through some other kind of dangerous activity. Right? The mind decides what will become of the body and what the body will do. So the body sets certain limits for the mind: sleep, eat, certain necessities. But ultimately, the mind is more powerful than the body because the mind can decide to end the necessities of the body. The mind also has control over the emotions. Plato gives the example of an example from Homer, where Odysseus strikes his chest and calls his emotions to order. Right? When you are overcome by emotion, your mind is able to call your heart to order. Right? If you are, overcome with fear, you can tell yourself to ignore those fears, to do something despite that fear. If you are enraged, your mind can tell you to calm down, to not act in anger. So the mind is the kind of executive functions, the highest part of being an individual, because it has this power to control both the emotions and the body. What that means is that to be a fully functioning individual, to sort of fully actualize what you are as an individual, means to focus on your mind, to develop your mind, to allow your mind to be the executive function that it is. And this is why, for Plato, the best people, the best individuals, are those who are governed not by their bodily wants and needs, nor by their passions, but by the logos, by rationality, by their minds. The philosopher is the one who acts because of knowledge, not because of something they desire or something they feel. And so the mind, then, is the final term in the analogy between the individual and the state. The mind is analogous to the ruler in a state, to those philosopher kings. So those philosopher kings will be like the mind of the state. And again, this is why Plato would doubt the virtue of democracy, right? That in a democracy, laws will be chosen by the many, by the masses, who are more likely to be motivated by emotion or, well, I think particularly emotion than by rationality, right? To be motivated by fear, to be motivated by envy, or something that is less than rational. When you act on emotion, you are not acting rationally, and therefore you don't necessarily know what your action is going to produce, whether or not that action based on emotion will actually be good for you, right? If you kill someone in anger, or harm someone in envy or fear, you may be doing something that feels good in the moment, right? To lash out, to seek revenge, to pursue your self-interest, whatever feels good to you at the moment. But oftentimes when you act on emotion, when you act on the passions, those actions are going to have consequences that you didn't anticipate or which you don't like, which end up not being in your self-interest. So to act on emotion or on passions is to act without having a grip on the consequences and of those actions, and therefore to act ignorantly. Right? The philosopher, the wise person, is the one who is able to control their emotions and to act in a way that is always going to have the best consequences, right? Or at least to attempt to act in the name of objectively good consequences, rather than merely consequences that are going to satisfy some emotional need of the moment. So this sort of grand analogy between the individual and the state is one of the main ideas of the Republic. And this idea that the individual, like the state, needs to be governed by the logos, by reason, is a direct continuation of that idea that we saw in the Euthyphro, right? That you shouldn't act unless you know. Euthyphro shouldn't indict his father for murder unless he can say with certainty what the pious is, and therefore that what he's doing is in line with, in harmony with that idea of piety, the form of piety. I have to know, similarly, the form of justice, right? The objective idea of justice, what is good in itself, before I act. Not what's good for me, not what I want, not what's in my self-interest, what is good in itself. And so the philosopher ruler is able to set aside emotion and govern and make laws based on the good in itself, based on the form of justice in itself. Now, that's why the education of the philosopher and education itself is so important. How do we learn these forms? How do we learn reality, what is true? And what is education? For Plato, education is about learning the forms. Education is the revelation of the forms. So let me say a couple general things about this. So in Book 7, we get, Book 7 is divided into two parts, essentially. The first half is the allegory of the cave. And in the allegory of the cave, Plato is describing, as he says, the effects of education on the individual, and what effect the lack of education has on the individual. The allegory of the cave, therefore, shows what education does, but also what the differences between an educated perspective on reality and an uneducated perspective on reality. How the educated view it and how the uneducated view it. So what the educated person knows, sort of in a broad allegorical sense. The second half of Book 7 is often referred to as the education of the philosopher. And this is a description of how education brings about this different worldview, how education leads the student to true knowledge. And so these two parts together show what reality is, what an educated perspective looks like, and then prescribes a course of education for achieving this knowledge of reality. So let's begin with the first part, naturally, right? Which is the allegory of the cave. So we are reading from Alan Bloom's translation, and we're just jumping into this, right? We're jumping into Book 7, so we're a little bit fragmented. But this begins with, or rather, in Book 7, we have a discussion between Socrates again and Glaucon. Glaucon and Adeimantus. Now, unlike in the Euthyphro, where Socrates is talking to this young soothsayer and, right, sort of trying to persuade a non-philosopher to pursue education, right, to take philosophy seriously, to show that in order to be an expert in soothsaying and piety, you have to have first gone through a kind of philosophical education. In the Republic, by contrast, Socrates is talking to his own disciples. Glaucon and Adeimantus are followers of Socrates, Glaucon is Plato's own brother, right? In real life, historically, Glaucon was Plato's brother. So Plato and Glaucon were brothers who were both followers of Plato. Now, the dialogue is going to have a different tone than the Euthyphro. This is a discussion among philosophers, among people who are already persuaded of the virtues of philosophy. So Socrates here is less combative, is not using the sort of Socratic method in the same way, and we don't have the same Socratic irony, right? Socrates here is not claiming to know nothing, but is instead kind of explaining what he knows and what he believes. So they've arrived in their discussion at this point of education, where they need to know what education is. So he says, "Next, I said," and the I here is Socrates, "make an image of our nature in its education and want of education." Right? What is the nature of being educated? What is the nature of lacking education? Likening it to a condition of the following kind. All right, so we are going to now illustrate the difference between being educated and uneducated through this example. See human beings as though they were in an underground cave, in an underground cave-like dwelling, with its entrance, a long one, open to the light across the whole width of the cave. They are in it from childhood, with their legs and necks in bonds, so they are fixed, seeing only in front of them, unable, because of the bond, to turn their heads all the way around. Their light is from a fire burning far above and behind them. Between the fire and the prisoners, there is a road above, along which we see a wall built like the partitions puppet handlers set in front of the human beings and over which they show the puppets. All right, so normally I would draw a very crude rendition of this scene on the board. But right, we have sort of three terms here thus far. We have, imagine a cave, and the cave is like a tunnel going deeper into the ground. It is going, doesn't have to be going down, just, it itself represents a kind of hierarchy from light to darkness. Right? At the mouth of the cave, there is the light of day, and in the back of the cave, there is darkness. Right? At the very back of the cave, we have a group of prisoners who are bound, right? Chained to the wall. Their arms and legs are chained together, and they're chained to the wall. Not only are their arms and legs chained, but their heads are fastened, fixed to be able to look only one direction. They can only look straight ahead. They can't turn around and look behind them to see the light of the cave mouth. Now, so we have this group of prisoners sitting in imagine a semicircle, and they're all staring at the back of the cave wall. In the middle of the cave, there is a road, right? And next to this road, there is a fire. The fire is an interesting moment in this metaphor. The fire is providing an artificial kind of light. Between the back of the cave wall and the cave mouth, where we have the light of day, there is this artificial light, this fire. Now this fire is next to a road. Right? And on the road, as Socrates goes on to say, there are figures who are walking along the road, carrying artifacts. So imagine people carrying, a flag and a spear and a drum and a sword, right? People carrying objects. Between the fire and this road is a screen, like the kind that puppeteers use, Plato says. The point of this screen is to project the shadows that are cast by these figures walking on the road onto the back of the cave wall. The light of the fire throws the shadows of these people that are walking on the road, and the shadows appear on the back wall. So the important thing is that these prisoners at the back of the cave, who have their heads chained, they can only look at the back of the cave wall. That's all they can see. And what do they see on this cave wall? They see the shadows of these people walking on this road behind them. Right? So we have prisoners, people on the road, a fire, and the fire is casting the shadow of these people walking onto the back wall. Plato says these prisoners who are watching this back wall will see these shadows and believe that these shadows are people themselves, are not the shadows of people, but are the real thing. They will take the shadows to be reality. Not only that, but the sound that is coming from the people walking on the road is going to bounce off of the back of the cave wall. So it will appear that these shadows are moving. It will even appear that they are speaking. And so these prisoners will have every reason to believe that the shadows are real people. And Plato says culture will crop up around these shadows. These prisoners will take these shadows to be reality and will build a kind of culture around this reality. They will have games, they will have competitions, they'll make bets about what these shadows are going to do. Right? They'll make predictions about these shadows. They will discuss these shadows the way that we discuss reality. Right? So these prisoners have an alternate reality in their cave. Right? And they take that alternate reality to be reality. So obviously, right, we have Plato setting up a grand kind of illusion. These prisoners are living a lie. They're living an illusion, taking shadows to be real. Now, Socrates says a strange image. No, this idea of people in a cave watching shadows. Glaucon says yes. And Socrates says, they are like us. These prisoners are like us. Another analogy, right? We are like the prisoners. So, how are we like the prisoners? The prisoners, well, we'll come back to this question. How are we like the prisoners? But it's important that Socrates says that, right? Notes this analogy. Now, what happens next is that this illusion is broken. one of the prisoners escapes, becomes free, escapes their bonds, turns around, and sees the fire burning behind them. Right? The prisoner gets a taste of reality. And the prisoner turns around, leaves the realm of shadows, and crosses the road, sees the fire, and goes out into the world, leaves the cave. This is the beginning of education, right? When someone is freed. And it's interesting that Plato puts this in the past tense, or I'm sorry, the passive tense, right? That a prisoner is freed. A prisoner becomes free. Something frees one of the prisoners. And this is the experience of becoming educated, becoming doubtful, right? Becoming skeptical of something, perhaps, right? Everyone says something is true. Everyone says these shadows are reality. And then suddenly I have some experience. Maybe I talk to someone that, gives me a reason for doubt, or I encounter something, I discover something, I have some experience that makes me question that reality. I then go in search of the truth, a different truth than the one that I get in my realm of shadows. Now, when I am sort of spurred to go in search of truth, to abandon the shadows, I'm going to wade tentatively into that reality. So Plato says, on this first attempt to leave the cave, the prisoner gets out of the cave and is blinded. Now, this is an interesting moment also. Plato says there are two kinds of blindness. There is the blindness when you leave the light and go into the dark, where your eyes need time to adjust to darkness. But there's also the blindness when you leave a dark room and enter the light, right? When you're blinded by the light. Two kinds of blindness. And this is important because one of the most pressing questions, or one of the sort of trickier questions in this allegory, is how do I know that the reality of the cave, of the shadows, is in fact less real than the reality outside of the cave? How do I know for sure that one of them is illusion and one of them is truth? So this fact that you're blinded both going into the cave and coming out of it is interesting. But in any case, the prisoner leaves the cave, is blinded by the light, and is confronted by a world that is totally alien, totally foreign. Right? Suddenly, the prisoner is looking at objects, not just shadows, but real things. And this reality is startling and upsetting. The prisoner is unsettled and decides to go back into the cave, right? Back to what is familiar, back to what is comfortable, back to what they know. So I guess we'll say, right, that one way to think about, or sort of modern take on this allegory of the cave, is in that 90s movie, The Matrix. And I sort of resent having to talk about The Matrix every time we do the cave now, but it is also, I think, a useful way to think about this this analogy, this allegory in the modern day. Right, the matrix is a computer-generated reality that is an illusion. If you haven't seen the movie, maybe watch it, but it's essentially this. This is the scenario. Human beings have been conquered by robots, and we are kept in these little sort of fluid-filled cases, and our bodies are harvested for energy. Right? The robots get their energy from sucking the energy from human bodies. So we're alive, we human beings, but right, the idea is our consciousness rebels. We can't be conscious of the reality that we are merely bodies in this fluid. We are merely batteries powering robots. And so to placate us, to put our minds at ease, to make it possible for us to survive, the robots connect our brains to an extremely advanced virtual reality simulator that simulates the entire world, the matrix. Right? The idea being that the world that we live in right now is entirely an illusion. That reality, the reality is that we are essentially brains in a vat, connected to computers that are making us believe that we live in this three-dimensional world. Right? And so in this case, right, to leave the cave is to leave the matrix and to realize what reality is. And there's a good moment in the Matrix, one that maps onto Plato's cave allegory, where one of the characters has come out of the Matrix and decides that they want to go back into the Matrix, right? Because outside of the Matrix, it's not pleasant, right? It's a harsh reality, a harsh world. Whereas in the Matrix, things are relatively good. It's the 90s. Things are great. So this character wants to go back into the Matrix. And this is what's happening in Plato's cave allegory also. The idea, this reality is unpleasant. It's confusing. I don't want to deal with it. I just want to return to what is normal. Right? And I think this is a real impulse. Education can be very unsettling, very upsetting. Right, to learn that things that you believe to be true maybe aren't true. Right? Think about when you learn that Santa Claus isn't real. Right? Spoiler alert. And or that experience is leaving behind an illusion. And it's a very painful experience. Right? This wonderful magical being that brings you presents. It's just your mom and dad. Right? Or it's just your caretaker. And that experience, although it is a necessary part of you learning what reality is, it's likely that you will want to return to a time where you believed in Santa, where you could convince yourself that Santa was real. Right? You miss the reality, your previous reality. You miss the illusion. Right? The illusion is very comforting. So that's what's happening here. This prisoner returns to the cave. So education has to start again. Right? Education now has to be forced. Plato said, or Socrates says, imagine then that someone went into the cave and forcibly dragged this prisoner out of the cave. The prisoner is dragged out of the cave and forced to confront this reality. And this is what education is. Education is forcing people to confront reality, even when they don't want to. And now that the prisoner is forcibly removed from the cave, they have to go through a process of acclimating to reality. They need to discover what reality is. And here, Plato gives us a stepwise process by which the prisoner leaves behind the reality of illusions and, the world of illusions in the cave, and moves into the world of reality. The prisoner will have to begin small and slowly build to bigger things. So first, the prisoner will look at shadows outside of the cave, right? Those things that he's already familiar with. Right? He remembers shadows from the cave. He's able to recognize and deal with shadows outside of the cave, right? Now that's in itself important, right? Whereas in the cave, all that existed were shadows. Outside of the cave, there are shadows, but there are other things also. Right? Outside of the cave, there's an explanation for shadows. Shadows are part of a world, whereas in the cave, there are only shadows and nothing else. So the external world contains the world of the cave. It has an explanation for what's in the cave. That's an important point. But in any case, right, so the prisoner first becomes familiar with shadows outside of the cave, says then the prisoner will become familiar with things reflected in water, right, reflections of things, reflections being like shadows, but with more content. Not yet the things themselves, but again, a different sort of representation of those things, or replica of those things. A shadow is a kind of replica of the original, a bad copy. A reflection is a bad copy of the real thing. So we aren't at reality yet. We're in the realm of the real, but we're still dealing with of replicas and copies of the real within the world, building toward the real itself. So after learning shadows, after learning reflections, Plato says, then the prisoner can learn to look on things as they are in themselves, right? Learn to look at the things themselves, to see not the reflection of a tree in a lake, but to look at the tree itself in its full light and color, detail, and being, right? The tree itself is more real, has more content, more reality than either the reflection or the shadow, right? It is the thing itself. But the stepwise process is not done yet. Right? The prisoner is now looking at things themselves, but in order to truly understand this realm of the real, it can't stop at individuals. It has to move beyond those individuals to explain the causes of those individuals, right? Remember, knowledge is knowledge of causes. Knowledge is knowledge of cause and effect. And to know a thing, you have to know not just what it looks like, in reality, but also what causes it to be that way, to explain why and how it is that thing. And so the process of education about reality continues. The prisoner then has to look beyond the horizon, the earth, the things that surround him, and look above. And Plato says, at first, the prisoner will have an easier time looking at the sky at night. Right? The sky at night will be easier to understand, to see, The darkness resembles, again, the darkness of the cave, right? We still have the kind of hangover of the cave. We're still in this stepwise process, moving out of the cave from our false beliefs, our false opinions about reality, our illusions, into reality, into knowledge. Right? So first, seeing the sky at night, and first the darkness of the night, and then the stars. Right? Now, this metaphor is interesting. Right? The stars are a stepping stone towards something else. The stars are a light. Right? The stars provide light, but there are many of them. There is a great multitude of stars, just as there is a great multitude of objects, of individuals on Earth. So the prisoner first becomes familiar with the many, right? The multiplicity, the many stars at night. Only after seeing and understanding stars can the prisoner then begin to look at the sky during the day. And what is the sky during the day? It is light. Right? And that light comes from the sun. The sun is the pinnacle of the prisoner's education about reality. In learning about the sun, the prisoner is going to learn about the true nature of the realm of reality outside the cave. Now, this final step is a step beyond knowledge of the stars, because like the stars, the sun gives light. But unlike the stars, which are many, the sun is a one, is singular. Right? It is the singular cause of all light. The sun is the cause. Sun is the cause of the physical world, of the visible realm. What the prisoner learns when they learn about the sun is that the sun is the cause of everything in the visible realm. Right? I'm able to see a shadow because of the sun. I'm able to see a reflection because of the sun. I'm able to see a thing itself only by virtue of the light of the sun. The sun makes knowledge about the visible world possible. The sun makes all kinds of visual knowledge possible. The sun makes things appear. It is the cause of all knowledge about physical things. But the sun is something more also. The sun is not just the cause of visibility. The sun is also the cause of the entire system of nature, the entire system of the visible world. Right? Plato says what they will learn about the sun is that it causes the seasons, that it causes things to grow, right? That the tree grows because of the sun, that the animal lives by eating those plants that live off the sun, right? That there is a whole chain of causes and effects, a whole harmony to nature that is caused by and revolves around the sun. So the sun is the center of physical being. Not only that, but The sun is ultimately the cause not just of truth within the visible realm outside the cave, but it is also the cause of uh, the illusions within the cave, insofar as the light from the fire that throws the shadows on the back of the cave ultimately finds its source, Plato says, in the fire of the sun, in the light of the sun. The fire derives its power from the sun. So everything is caused by the sun, everything is derived from the sun. The sun is the center of being. So let's think about this analogy in broad strokes a little bit here. Plato is setting up in this allegory a story about two realms, a realm of illusion and the realm of truth, the realm of appearance and the realm of knowledge, the realm of, opinion and the realm of knowledge. Cave represents the realm of opinion, the realm of appearance, right? I believe something. I believe something to be true. I don't know it to be true, right? I believe that those shadows are reality. Those shadows appear to me to be reality. In order to escape the realm of appearance, in order to escape mere opinion, we need to be dragged out of this realm of illusion and shown reality through education. In moving out of the cave and away from appearance and opinion, we learn things as they actually are, not in their shadowy appearances, but in reality. And in that process, we attain the truth and knowledge, which are concrete and real, and different from opinion and appearance. Right? Truth and knowledge are objective, unchanging, certain. Right? Shadows have no content. Things have content. They are, right? In the way that we were thinking about with Euthyphro, things that exist in themselves by virtue of themselves. Shadow can only exist by virtue of something else. Right? The tree exists under its own autonomy, right? Ultimately, it needs the sun, it derives its power from the sun, it is caused by the sun, and it's part of the system. But I don't need anything but the tree to know what the tree is. The tree exists not as a copy or reflection of something else. So, the allegory of the cave is showing how education moves us from illusion to truth. Plato calls this the turning of the soul. Education turns the soul away from illusion toward truth, away from opinion toward knowledge. So, the realm of opinion and appearance is juxtaposed with the realm of knowledge and truth. And we also then are seeing that Plato is pushing us toward another analogy, which is the analogy to the movement from the physical realm to the realm of forms, right? That education, this process of escaping illusion and escaping mere opinion, means moving out of a belief in appearances, a belief in the physical world, that physical things are real, and moving through education to realize that only the forms are real, that the ideas are more real than the physical appearances. So in the allegory of the cave, the shadows are analogous to the physical realm, physical world, and the world outside the cave is analogous to the realm of forms, right? The ideas that that are the true reality of those physical appearances. So I'm going to stop this video here, and I'm going to pick up to do the education of the philosopher in a subsequent video. But what Plato has prepared us for now is a more concrete discussion of how education points us away from the idea that reality lies in the physical world and teaches us that reality lies instead in ideas, in the realm of forms. So in the education of the philosopher, we will see sort of first how education can achieve this, what the program of education is that will help us escape the cave, but then also a kind of demonstration that reality is intellectual, not physical. Reality is in ideas, not in appearances. All right, so we'll pause here, and I will pick it up in a minute.